This is a Dynamite Network podcast.
Hi, welcome to the Dynamic Duel Podcast, a weekly show where we review superhero films and debate the superiority between Marvel and DC by comparing their characters in stat-based battle simulations. I'm Johnny DC.
And I'm his twin brother, Marvelous Joe.
And in this episode, we are doing a review of DC Studios' first ever project, the animated series Creature Commandos, written by James Gunn, the head of DC Studios. Was it a worthwhile start to the new DC universe? You'll find out later on in our review. Before that, we're going to break down the comic book movie news from the past week, of which there was just one major news item, and that was the new official trailer for the Daredevil Born Again series for Disney+.
Yeah, as always, we list our segment times in our episode description, so feel free to check out the show notes if you want to skip ahead to a particular topic. Guys, our artificially intelligent duel simulator, AJ9K, has a quick message for our listeners, so listen up.
Why, hello there. Do you want even more from this podcast? Then become a part of the Dynamic Duel community on Patreon, where you can choose from 3 tiers. The Dynamic 2.0 tier gives you access to our Discord chat server, the Fantastic 4 tier gives you 2 bonus episodes each month, and the X-Force tier makes you an executive producer of this show. Lastly, the Dynamite Podcast Network tier lets you create your own podcast using this Monte Carlo simulator. Johnny and Joe will help you develop your show, provide graphic support and consultation, and get you simulation results. Pitch the twins your ideas via email at dynamicduelpodcast@gmail.com. Check it out at patreon.com/dynamicduel. Pip pip cheerio.
Thanks, AJ9K, and thanks to everyone who supports the podcast. Real quick, today, January 21st, happens to be the birthday of both Joseph and myself, so I just want to say happy birthday, Joseph. If I could get you any gift from DC, it would be a big belly burger, because it'll make you fat.
If I could get you any gift from Marvel, it would be nothing, because you wouldn't deserve it.
Oh, good. Just what I've always wanted. Nothing for Marvel.
I'll take a big belly burger, not gonna lie. That
Yeah,
sounds
you
pretty
would.
good.
Guys, be sure to tune into the other shows in the Dynamite Podcast Network this week.
Including Max Destruction, which pits your favorite action heroes from film and television against each other. This week, hosts Scotty and Gilly are reviewing the 1997 film Spawn.
On the Senjo World podcast, host Zachary Hepburn speculates on fights between fan-favorite anime and manga characters.
And on the Console Combat podcast, hosts John and Dean simulate battles between popular video game characters. In yesterday's episode, they found out who would win between Krieg from Borderlands and Bane from Arkham Asylum.
Visit dynamicpodcasts.com or click the link in our show notes to listen to all of the shows in the Dynamite Podcast Network.
But with that out of the way,
Quick, to the No Prize!
a No Prize is an award Marvel used to give out to fans. Our version, the Dynamic Duel No Prize, is a digital award we post on Instagram for the person that we feel gave the best answer to our question of the week. Last week, we asked you guys, what Marvel or DC theatrical film are you most looking forward to in 2025? You basically had 4 options. There's Captain America Brave New World, Thunderbolts, Superman, and Fantastic Four First Steps. We got 3 answers this week, so let's go ahead and break down the honorable mentions as well as the No Prize winner. Our first honorable mention goes to Mike Williams, who said,
I'm very interested to see the new Captain America movie, to see what role the Red Hawk's going to play, and also how General Thunderbolt Ross is connected with the Thunderbolts movie that will be coming out later this year. Anyway, as always, make mine Marvel. Take care.
yeah, Captain America Brave New World, I believe the tickets actually went on sale already. I'm really looking forward to that movie, mostly for the appearance of Red Hulk and the leader. I kind of feel like they maxed out the coolness factor of Sam Wilson in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier television series and all of his appearances from Captain America the Winter Soldier and Civil War. We've seen a lot of what he can do already. So I find myself more drawn toward the villains of Captain America Brave New World than the hero. That being said, I'm excited Sam's getting his own movie.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited to see this as well, especially after the last trailer that we received. We still don't know too much about the story, I feel, But visually and action-wise, it looks like the movie's going to be incredible.
If it can capture the same spirit as Captain America the Winter Soldier, I think we're in for quite the treat in a few weeks.
Great answer, Mike. Our next honorable mention goes to Miggy Matanguihan, who said,
Hey, what's up, guys? This is Miggy, and like Lizzie said in the Discord server, there's only one right answer this week. It's Superman. It's going to be so good. It's going to be everything that you want in a Superman movie, characterize the hero really well, and it's the only movie you should be looking forward to this year because Marvel sucks. It's dying. Just let it die, you know? Like, it's been dead. Why are you still trying to hang around? Stop it.
That's right. Marvel is dead. Bury it. Consider this mercy.
I think Deadpool and Wolverine would probably disagree there. I mean, the movie made over $1 billion, okay? Marvel's not dead. Marvel is thriving. The Captain America movie is going to be awesome. And, like, Miggy's over here talking about how the Superman movie is going to be everything you want from a Superman movie. Like, he's seen the film. What if it doesn't have everything you want from a Superman movie? What if your expectations are too high, my friend?
Not possible. Superman is going to nail it out of the park. I cannot wait to see it. It's going to be the next best Superman movie since Superman the movie and Man of Steel.
Jonathan, do you remember everything you were saying about Batman vs. Superman before that film came out?
Hey, the extended edition was everything I wanted.
Do you remember everything you were saying about Joker 2 before that film came out?
Too soon, man. Too soon.
Great answer, Miggy. But the winner of this week's No Prize is Cat Stevenson, who said,
Hi guys, it's Cat Stevenson here, and the theatrical release that I am most excited for is Pedro Pascal. Fantastic Four: First Steps. I'm so excited to see Pedro Pascal. The Fantastic Four finally get a good rendition. With Pedro Pascal, Mr. Fantastic, Galactus, Silver Surfer, the really cool rendition of Pedro Pascal. The Thing. Everything looks so good, and I am so excited for Pedro Pascal. The Fantastic Four to come to the MCU.
Sounds like someone's really excited about the casting of Pedro Pascal as Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic, in the Fantastic Four movie coming out this summer. I will be honest, and I think I've said it when he was cast and that was announced last year, I'm not thrilled about Pedro Pascal as Mr. Fantastic, but I do like him as an actor, and I do think he could pull off the role.
Yeah, the reason we mostly chose this as our No Prize win is because we've had good Captain America movies, we've had good Superman movies, but I feel like we have yet to get a good Fantastic Four movie.
Yeah, I'm really hoping that this will be the case. I'm really looking forward to seeing Galactus done correctly on the big screen. I think the scale of that character in theaters is just going to be mind-blowing. I hope it is. And I really like the rest of the cast as well. So here's hoping that the spirit of the Fantastic Four comics is truly represented on film. You know, they've had multiple goes at it, from the 90s movie that didn't get released, the early 2000s franchise with Jessica Alba, and of course, Fantastic, which came out in the 2010s. They got to get it right this time. I think they will.
Yeah, to go from one of the worst superhero movies to an actually good Fantastic Four movie would be the greatest comeback in the history of comic book franchises.
Maybe. What I'm hoping is that it turns a lot of people on to the Fantastic Four. Like, I don't think they have many fans, especially because their films have done so poorly. So I'm hoping that the characters become A-list names in households just like the Avengers have. That would be best case scenario.
I guess we'll see. Great answer, Kat. You win this week's No Prize. If you, the listener, want a shot at winning your own No Prize, stay tuned to later on in this episode when we'll be asking another question of the week.
And now that that's done,
on to the news.
This past week, we got the official trailer for the upcoming Daredevil Born Again television series that's coming out on Disney Plus in just a few months on March 4th. And damn, this show looks good. Like, I don't know what they had planned before the whole series retooling, but whatever they did really worked, because this show looks not just like a great continuation of the Netflix series, it looks even more set in the superhero world. That was my big takeaway from it, because we got a lot of shots that really seem to immerse the character more in the comic book world of Marvel than he's ever been. Because we see things like, multiple costumes that he's worn, including homages to his gray battle suit and his yellow costume and things like that. But we also got glimpses of other characters like Muse, White Tiger, the Punisher. It looks like a really exciting time.
It's hard for me to fathom how they could follow up the masterpiece that was Daredevil Season 3 And I have to say, after seeing this trailer, this is the first hope I've had that they could actually do that.
Yeah, I don't need Daredevil Born Again to surpass the quality of Netflix's Daredevil season 3, because in my mind that was almost perfection and it was the perfect cap on that run. That being said, I do think it'll come close. It may not be a perfect season, but I think it's highly unlikely they're going to drop the ball on this. You know, I think we're looking to get like Penguin levels of good here, but with actual superheroics and vigilante fighting.
The action looks almost more brutal than what we got in Netflix.
Yeah, I do have to say, though, I feel bad for the villain of Muse. Not because he's a good guy or anything. He's a piece of shit. But he just gets his ass kicked left and right nonstop in this trailer. There's at least like 4 different shots of Daredevil just beating the ever-loving shit out of him. And I hope it doesn't quite go down like that in the actual show. I hope there's an actual good fight there to be had.
Is Muse the guy who Murdoch slams the bottle on his eye and then like kicks in his kneecap?
No, that's a different guy. Daredevil's kicking some ass in this trailer, for sure. I wonder if Daredevil and Hector Elia, aka White Tiger, are going to fight in this show. That'll be pretty interesting. And I'm wondering how they're going to bring back Frank Castle into the fold as another vigilante warrior.
I'm wondering how they're going to bring Bullseye into the fold, because I can't wait to see his return.
Oh man, Bullseye was so good in Daredevil Season 3. Yeah. It's just, even if the show ends up not being good, all the elements are there for it to be incredible. Especially this diner discussion between Matt Murdock and Wilson Fisk, who becomes the mayor of New York during the course of this season. It just seems so epic in the way that like Robert De Niro and Al Pacino spoke in Heat or something like that, you know? These two iconic characters coming together and just their discussion.
Yeah, they're speaking like they're old exes or something like that. But of course, we know the nature of their past relationship, and it's as brutal as it gets.
Yeah, they're sworn mortal enemies, but they do seem to have some respect for each other, as it appears here, which is always interesting.
Well, it appears like each character has kind of moved on. Like Wilson Fisk is moving on to be mayor, and it sounds like Matt Murdock hasn't been Daredevil in a while. So it's going to be interesting to see how they make their return to superhero and supervillain lives.
Yeah, when Kingpin asks Matt Murdock why he stopped being Daredevil, Matt Murdock mentions that a line was crossed. And towards the end of the trailer, he mentions how he was raised to believe in grace, but he was also raised to believe in retribution. And I wonder if that's one of the key themes of this season, is him really struggling with crossing the line due to his rage and how that correlates with his Catholic faith, which has always been a big aspect of the character and one of the things that makes him truly unique. If you guys haven't caught up on Netflix Daredevil seasons 1 through 3, I highly recommend you do so before this next season drops, because there's a lot of history with these characters and it's such a damn good show. It's well worth catching up on.
Yeah, absolutely.
But speaking of quality television shows, that brings us to our question of the week.
What Marvel or DC television series are you most looking forward to in 2025? This is sort of a play on last week's question, but instead of theatrical releases, we want to know what series you're most looking forward to seeing at home.
Yeah, for Marvel, they're releasing Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, and then Daredevil Born Again, and then Ironheart is coming out this year, as well as Eyes of Wakanda, Marvel Zombies, and Wonder Man.
There's not too much more going on for DC. Of course, we have Harley Quinn Season 5 coming up. We might be getting new seasons for My Adventures with Superman, Batman Caped Crusader, and possibly Creature Commandos, but also a new series on Amazon titled Bat Family.
Oh, is that the sequel to Merry Little Batman?
Yes. Yep, that's right.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Record your answer at dynamicduel.com by clicking on the red microphone button in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, which will prompt you to leave us a voicemail. Your message can be up to 30 seconds long, and don't forget to leave your name in case we include you on the podcast. We'll pick our favorite answer and award that person a Dynamic Duel No prize that we'll post to Instagram. Be sure to answer before January 25th. But that does it for the news portion of this episode. So now let's go ahead and move on to our main event, where we review Season 1 of the DC Studios animated series, Creature Commandos. Commandos is an animated series created by James Gunn, the head of DC Studios, for which this show is the studio's first project in the newly established DC universe. The show marks the start of a quasi-reboot, in the same way that 2021's The Suicide Squad, written and directed by James Gunn, was a quasi-reboot of 2016's Suicide Squad film, written and directed by David Ayer. The story of Creature Commandos stems from the events of Gunn's The Suicide Squad and subsequent Peacemaker spin-off series, both of which we praised on this podcast in our reviews. This show, I'm mostly happy to say, is in keeping with James Gunn's signature crass comedy ensembles with heartfelt characterizations, and I definitely recommend it to anyone who's a fan of Gunn's prior work, whether for DC or the MCU's Guardians of the Galaxy franchise. Creature Commandos is only 7 half-hour episodes, a pretty quick watch, so make sure you do just that before listening any further to this spoiler review. Now, I said I was mostly happy to say that this show matched the crass comedy and emotional weight of James Gunn's past works, because I liked those past works. I'm a fan of James Gunn. But there was also a part of me that hoped Gunn had matured to the point where he was able to deliver on the emotional aspects of a story without resorting to mature humor. And in this first DC Studios project out of the gate, he delivers arguably his most mature story to date, one full of extreme violence and sexuality, which was somewhat discouraging. Now, I'm fairly confident James Gunn's Superman movie coming out this summer is not going to match the tone of Creature Commandos, but this show does present a barrier to those looking to faithfully experience DC's new cinematic universe in the same way audiences were extremely faithful in seeing everything Marvel Studios released during the Infinity Saga storyline.
Yeah, well, I mean, Creature Commandos was written, at least the specs were written by James Gunn prior to the existence of the DCU. You know, he wrote them when HBO was looking for an animated series from him coming off the success of Peacemaker Season 1. So the tone of Creature Commandos, I think, is more in line with James Gunn's whole vision for the Suicide Squad quadrant of the DCU, and not necessarily representative of what the tone is going to be for the DCU going forward.
True, that very may well be the case. Now, I often criticize Marvel films for their over-reliance on humor, and while I shouldn't be surprised that the guy who made the Guardians of the Galaxy films was going to bring that humor to DC Studios, in part probably because it obviously sells well given the MCU's financial success, I do tend to see DC characters and stories as being above that. Like, DC's Oscar-worthy, whereas Marvel's made more for like the MTV Movie Awards audience. So I never really wanted the DCU to be more like the MCU, and I'm, slowly coming to terms with the fact that, well, Marvel is like the really popular sugary soda Coca-Cola, and while I want DC to be like a fine bourbon, not necessarily for everyone, DC actually ending up like Pepsi is not the worst thing in the world, because there are a lot of people out there of all ages that like Pepsi. I'm not one of them, but I can learn to like it, especially if these mature projects like Creature Commandos are relegated to niche animated fare.
I like how you compared DC to Pepsi.
I think the analogy works. Marvel's red, DC's blue. DC has a circular logo. It just made sense branding-wise in my head.
Pepsi is also dog shit, so...
Hey, fuck you, man. Don't make me defend Pepsi. Now, because as a niche exploitation-esque project, Creature Commandos really hits the nail on the head. It feels very much like a successor, as I mentioned, to the Suicide Squad in regards to its mission-based narrative and real stakes in which any of your favorite characters could die. It feels like a passion project from James Gunn, who does a tremendous job conveying that behind every monster is a tragedy. In fact, each episode of the series is dedicated to showing us the past tragedy of an individual character on the Creature Commandos team that helps us recognize the humanity in the characters and view them as much more than just monsters.
That was my big takeaway from the show, was just the tragedy of the characters. You're talking about some of the most tragic characters to ever exist in comics. And really, you kind of need that humor because of some of the horrific, sad things that you see happen on the screen. You need that balance. Otherwise, it would just be one heck of a depressing show. And in some ways, it was, just due to how everything was presented. Like, I don't think I've seen as many instances of dead children in a superhero project. And it was actually surprising to me. And I don't know if that's just because I'm a dad now, but I was really affected by it. And that's not to say that the show was shocking for shocking's sake, because, you know, if you look at the story of the Creature Commandos from the comic books, they went through some dark shit. Like there was that whole arc where they were commanded during World War II to kill that group of super soldier Nazi children.
Right.
And they ended up doing it. And, you know, there was a lot of dysfunction in the team because of that. It's all these tragic stories that you were referring to when you say that there's a tragedy behind every monster. And I agree that's the biggest idea that this series sold.
I agree. Their misfortunes result in a very cynical view of humanity and tone for the series, which is in contrast to what I'm hoping is a very hopeful tone for the upcoming flagship film for DC that is Superman. But for a project starring literal monsters, a cynical tone is appropriate, I feel, and shows some value in cynicism over, say, optimism, because cynicism tends to help people survive, giving these monsters the most human trait of all, and that is the instinct to survive.
That's valid. I mean, like, cynicism is one of my least favorite traits that anybody could have. But I guess it is a valuable trait when it comes to, like, soldiers out on the battlefield or on a mission or something like that. It's good to be cynical and skeptical of everything and everyone around you when your life is on the line. Otherwise, yeah, I hope more people are like Superman.
Yeah, that's my hope for sure. But, you know, when the zombie apocalypse breaks out, I will be the most cynical person on the planet. Now, the show revolves heavily around its cast of characters, but before we get into our character breakdown, I want to touch on the show's animation style, which I would actually describe as this combination of the Tomorrow versus Cleanliness and unique character designs with the quirkiness and charm of mature animated favorites like Aeon Flux and just a hint of anime action. I wasn't actually looking forward to this style of animation in the trailers, but I actually grew to love it, especially the action scenes, which were often coupled with some deep-cut song choices that would make Quentin Tarantino proud. It also doesn't hurt that, you know, with the exception of one character, the characters look like the actors who voice them, making it easier to believe the performances and just making me really excited to see them all in live action, hopefully one day, maybe in Peacemaker Season 2.
Yeah, the animation was great. The violence level was shocking. It was almost, or maybe even surpassed the level of gore that we saw in the Hitmonkey series.
Oh yeah, when you have like Dr. Phosphorus just like shoving his hand like slowly through people's faces, melting it off, I'm like, good gosh.
Yeah, I think it was more like Invincible in that regard because, you know, the animation was a lot cleaner than it was in Hitmonkey. Hitmonkey was a little bit more stylized, like there was like a lot of blood spray. Here there was less spray and it was more just like splatter, I guess, if you could discern the difference in my description.
All I could say is I'm just glad I binged this show while I was not eating.
Yeah.
Moving on to the character breakdown, starting off with Rick Flag Sr. He was voiced by Frank Grillo of Crossbones fame in the MCU. I didn't recognize his voice. To me, he just sounded like a really good voice actor. I had forgotten that Frank Grillo voiced the character. He was good in the role and well cast as the father of Joel Kinnaman. I do have to say, though, that this character, more than any other character, looks the least like the actor who voiced them. Rick Flag Sr. actually looks more like James Gunn, with the white hair and beard, who we actually see in animated form in every opening credits of the show. I'm not sure why James Gunn decided to make Rick Flag Sr. look like him, considering he didn't in the show's promo art, like he had black hair, and Frank Grillo won't have white hair in the Superman movie, because we've seen behind-the-scenes photos of him on set as Rick Flag Sr.
That is a strange call, and it's a weird way to insert yourself, allegedly, in the story.
I don't understand the justification for it at all.
I just kind of miss Joel Kinnaman's character. I wish he wouldn't have died in the Suicide Squad.
Dude, we're all still heartbroken about that. Even the guy who killed him, Peacemaker, was heartbroken about that.
Yeah, I guess that was a big part of Peacemaker's arc in his show.
Speaking of arc, Rick Flag Sr. begins the series dealing with the loss of his son, Rick Flag Jr., who died in the 2021 film, The Suicide Squad. Princess Ilana Rostovic took advantage of his sorrow in an attempt to manipulate him into killing Cersei, the clairvoyant Themysciran sorceress who foresaw Princess Rostovic destroying the world. When the Amazonian expert Dr. McPherson vouched for the captured Cersei's credibility, Flag teamed up with Eric Frankenstein to spy on Dr. McPherson, only to learn that she had been killed and replaced by the shapeshifter Clayface. After being put into a coma by Clayface, Flag awoke briefly to warn Amanda Waller that she was wrong to send Task Force M back to Pekolistan to kill Princess Rostovik, unaware that the princess had been working with Clayface to discredit Dr. McPherson. Flag was wrong, however, too optimistic and gullible as compared to the cynical monsters he was trying to lead, whose disdain for the world and humankind actually helped them see through the princess's manipulations.
Yeah, it's hard to speak about Rick Flag as a character because, while I wouldn't call him one-dimensional or anything like that, he was also probably the least interesting in a group of literal freaks and monsters, you know?
Oh, totally. I actually thought Rick Flag Sr. was going to be the main character of the series, but I was totally wrong. He was knocked out of the series like halfway through, basically, and wasn't involved in like the climax or anything like that.
Right. And he ended up getting manipulated as well.
Right. His whole arc is just him being wrong, essentially, like I mentioned. So, moving on to The Bride, she was voiced by Indira Varma, who is a fantastic voice actress. It was just a fantastic character as well. I cannot wait for more of her character in the announced upcoming season for Creature Commandos. She was the most interesting character.
Yeah, she kind of had a chip on her shoulder, but you get into her backstory and it's really easy to see why, considering, you know, the people that she loved were killed by the people that she hates. And so she just really had this bitter attitude toward everything. But I like the way they portrayed her as this badass. It's not often that you get female characters who are this cynical. I can't even really think of any off the top of my head because, like, you think of characters like Black Widow and stuff like that. At least in the comics, they're closer to this version of the character, but this version was so much more violent than most other femme fatales that you get.
Yeah, she's like a super soldier Black Widow.
Yeah.
Now, The Bride was created by Dr. Victor Frankenstein as a mate for his monstrous creation, Eric Frankenstein. Eric didn't ask to be created and didn't want to live unloved, so Victor created the bride for him, though Eric was too impatient and uncouth for her to bond with him. Victor cared more for her, which turned into a romance between him and the bride, causing Eric to kill his creator in jealousy. The bride, enraged by what Eric had done, fought him and fled, beginning a pattern that would last centuries as Eric continued to stalk her across the planet. Life is a burden for the bride, and it's hardened her, but her experience makes her the perfect leader for a team of monsters, as recognized by Amanda Waller when she replaced Rick Flag Sr. as team leader with the bride, who was less easily manipulated.
Yeah, that was one of the best quotes, I think, in the show, where Amanda Waller was like, we need someone who's less of a whiny bitch and someone who's more just a bitch. It was so
great.
good.
Now, in the end, it's the bride alone who recognizes that Princess Rostovik was exactly the entitled, narcissistic person that Cersei claimed she was, though she killed the princess not because of what she would do, but because she killed Nina Mazursky, the one person the bride had grown to care for. I thought that was a fantastic story choice. The fact that the bride was like, you know what, you were planning on doing all of this horrible shit to humanity. I don't care at all about humanity. I'm just going to kill you because you killed my friend.
It was a fantastic ending and a great moment for the character. I think the one thing missing from the character of the bride was that she didn't have 4 arms like she does in the comics. I wish they would have done that in the series.
Yeah, sometimes she has 6 arms in the comics. Hopefully they'll do that in subsequent seasons. Moving on to Eric Frankenstein, he was voiced by David Harbour. This was the casting that I was most excited about when it was announced, and I actually like him a lot more in this role than the Red Guardian role for Marvel. He's fantastic, although I don't love what they did with the actual character.
Yeah, we pit Frankenstein against Elsa Bloodstone in a dual episode, and the backstory of the character was actually pretty interesting, but the way he's characterized in this show, they completely changed him, and he was despicable. He was the worst fucking character. I hated the guy.
Yeah, in the comics, Frankenstein is this wise and noble figure, but in the show, despite his somewhat likable buffoonery, he's cast very much like a violent stalker, essentially a villain in the series, making him pretty uncomfortable to watch. But also, it's somewhat in keeping with the literary character of Frankenstein's monster, who resents life and demands affection. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is probably my favorite story ever, so I'm really curious to see where they take the Eric Frankenstein character and see how he grows. Hopefully he does.
Do you think they're going to try to redeem him, or do you think they're going to double down and make him even more of an asshole?
I don't know. I hope they don't make it so that the bride falls in love with him. I hope Eric actually finds a new love and the bride finds a new love, because I don't think they're meant to be together. Because they never did that in the book. In fact, the character of the bride kills herself rather than be with Frankenstein's monster.
Is he called Eric in the books as well?
No.
I wonder why they call him Eric in this show.
I don't know. I think it was just to give him a name. Moving on to Nina Mazursky. She was voiced by Zoe Chow, who I'm not too familiar with. She's been in a number of minor roles in various projects. I did think she did a fantastic job voicing the role. You know, like Frankenstein, Nina Mazursky was fairly different in this show than she was in the comics. Here she's pretty naive, when in the comics she was a scientific genius who actually helped create the creature Commandos. In recent comics, at least. Her father created the team in its earliest incarnation, so that part they got somewhat right, in that Dr. Mazursky transformed his daughter out of care and necessity for her survival. James Gunn has a habit of killing off innocents in his works, so I shouldn't have been surprised that Nina did not survive to the end, but her death had a large impact on the bride, and I think it's one that will continue into future seasons. In a way, it's kind of bittersweet that Nina died still innocent, still having never killed someone and becoming the same kind of monster that the others were.
I was angry when she died. I was pissed because I liked her as a character. And I was wondering, why they even included her on a team of killers to begin with, if they probably knew by her psychological profile that she was not a killer.
Yeah, her role on the team was not incredibly practical, up until the end when she was tasked with killing the princess in the water. But for a majority of the season, Nina simply just wanted a friend, whether that was G.I. Robot or the bride. I think she was kind of there for moral support and to bring some small degree of optimism to the team. Moving on to G.I. Robot, he was voiced by Sean Gunn, who is James Gunn's brother, and who's a much better actor than I think people give him credit for, particularly when it comes to physicality. Now, of course, in an animated series, you don't really get to see that, but even vocally, the fact that he voiced multiple characters on the show, and it wasn't terribly easy to hear that, just lets us see his range as an actor.
Oh yeah, you compare his Kraglin voice to his G.I. Robot voice, it's night and day. I thought he was a fantastic G.I. Robot.
And even his weasel noises, that was pretty good. Now, G.I. Robot comes across as the most one-note character of the team. He simply wants to kill Nazis. But beneath that was also a yearning for camaraderie. He wanted to kill Nazis, but as part of a team. Literally nothing brought him more joy. And it was kind of sad to see him destroyed as he's finally getting to live out his life's purpose after all these years. But it was also cool to see him at the end with his upgrades.
Yeah, in the books he's called Jake, if I remember correctly, and he does get upgrades in the comics. I don't know if he quite looks like the tank that he is at the end of the show, though.
No, he doesn't. But yeah, there were actually two different versions of Jake. I'm guessing this is the number 2 version because he wore a number 2 on his helmet.
He cracked me up, though. I really love the scene where he's standing guard, watching over the princess outside of her door, and all he can talk about is just I killed 33 Nazis, and he just keeps going on and on about that stuff. But the look on his face, it almost looks like he's always smiling, right?
Yeah.
So there's just something really endearing and quirky about the character that I just loved.
Yeah, he was great. Now, of course, Sean Gunn's other performance was as Weasel, a role he played in the Suicide Squad film. I was really glad to learn that Weasel was not responsible for killing a whole bunch of children, as we learned in that movie. It turns out he didn't kill the kids, he simply tried to save them from a fire, but was mistaken as a monster attacking them. All the Weasel wants is to play, and he's instinctually very loyal to anyone who's kind enough to bond with him over a game of fetch, including the princess. It's fairly tragic that because he's not intelligent enough to follow orders, if he hadn't intervened in the princess's assassination, Nina Mazursky would have lived.
Yeah, that is tragic. But by the end of the series, Weasel became my favorite character. I didn't really care for Weasel in the Suicide Squad movie. But here, he just kind of reminds me of my dog. He just
totally
constantly always wanting to play. Even when you thought he was going to throw down with a pack of wolves and he picks up the stick and plays fetch and just spends the whole night playing with them. And then like his sole motivation to go to the castle was to play with the princess again because she played fetch with him. It was just so endearing, so endearing.
Yeah, absolutely. And still, even though he was responsible for Nina's death, the character is still extremely innocent and endearing because of that. Moving on to Dr. Phosphorus, he was voiced by Alan Tudyk, who is an absolute master of the craft of acting, both on screen and in his voiceover work. He's done a ton of voice roles for like Disney, but he's also done quite a bit for DC, such as being Mr. Nobody in the Doom Patrol. And he was fantastic in that role. And I'm glad he's sticking around in the new DCU.
Well, he's also in Harley Quinn.
That's right. Yeah, he voices Clayface and the Joker in that show. Now, before he was Dr. Phosphorus, the character was Dr. Alex Sartorius, whose family was killed by the Gotham City mobster Rupert Thorne after Dr. Sartorius forged data on a cancer-curing experiment that Thorne had funded. After being transformed into a radioactive skeleton and avenging his family, Dr. Sartorius, now known as Dr. Phosphorus, slid deeper and deeper into the pit of villainy and power until he was captured by Batman. He's the rebel of the group, and with his skeletal appearance, it was hard to see him as anything other than a violent monster until you learn his backstory and realize he, like any other man would, misses his family. The scene of him talking with the little girl, saying he can't have her telling others that she saw him, was kind of frightening, only for him to then be playing with her outside in the next scene, which was definitely a subversion of expectations.
I think the most shocking scene of the whole show was seeing him as a scientist being laughed at while being forced to run his fingerprints over the bodies of his dead wife and child.
Oh man, I've never seen anything like that before. It was unbelievably heartbreaking, for sure.
It's disturbing. And I think that like disturbance kind of sticks with you for that whole episode, which makes Dr. Phosphorus's interaction with the little girl so full of tension, you know. But it was a nice moment because it showed that he just really wanted to be a father again.
Right, exactly. Moving on to the final character in the character breakdown, Princess Ilana Rostovic. She was voiced by Maria Bakalova, who played Borat's daughter in Borat 2 and voiced Cosmo the Space Dog in Guardians of the Galaxy 3. She did a fantastic job with this role. You know, the princess begins the series as this manipulative minx who we later learn could potentially lead the destruction of the world. The overarching mystery of the show is whether or not this woman is trustworthy. She's the primary antagonist of the series, though we don't realize she's an actual villain until the final minutes of the season's final episode, where we learn, in the bride's words, that the princess was a power-mad, sadistic, narcissistic Disney princess who wants to destroy the world. And that changes a lot of how you see the character in retrospect, in that we knew she was manipulative since the beginning, but we didn't realize how malevolent those manipulations were and for what sick purpose.
Yeah, I guess the stakes were that she was in possession of some kind of devastating armor weapon that would be used to kill all the heroes in the world. Was she supposed to be some kind of analog to the Amethyst character from DC Comics? I wonder, because her knights were called Amethyst Knights.
I was wondering that. I'm not entirely sure because the princess is an original character, but given the way everything looked and the way she looked also, I would not be surprised if that was the case. That said, they probably did not want to go with Amethyst because Amethyst is a teenage hero in the comics.
I do wish they would have given a little bit more clarity into her true nature, like at least shown us this suit of armor in storage or something like that.
Or at least explain why she wants to take over the world. Is it because she just wants to rule everything? Because I don't love that as a motivation.
Yeah, it's a pretty weak and vague motivation as things go. And I guess that would be the biggest downfall of the season as a whole.
I agree. It kind of had a villain problem in that she's the antagonist, she's the person they're going up against, but we don't know really anything about the villain, like their motivation, which tends to signal a weak project. That said, I think the main focus of this series was the creature commandos and not her.
Yeah, the whole show was more character-driven than plot-driven. I actually found myself a little impatient with the show after the first 3 episodes because plot-wise, there's not a whole lot there. They basically go to Palokistan and defeat Cersei, and it's hard to tell where this story is going until episode 4. But basically, through the first 3 episodes, the interesting stuff comes from the character explorations.
Absolutely. Yeah, if you strip all of the flashbacks in this series, The story is very, very simple and actually not that great. It's the flashbacks that make this series. But speaking of the series, let's move on to our story highlights.
In a world where fantasies collide and heroes clash, one podcast network rises above the rest. Prepare yourself for the ultimate showdowns in comic books, video games, movies, and anime. The Dynamite Podcast Network presents Console Combat, where video game legends brawl every Monday. Dynamic Duel, where comic book titans smash every Tuesday. Max Destruction, where TV and action heroes battle every Wednesday. And Sendro World, where anime champions clash every Thursday. Join us as we speculate on the matches and, armed with the power of mathematical simulations, discover who will emerge victorious. Visit dynamicpodcast.com, where we settle the debate and settle the score.
Episode 1 was titled The Collywobbles. When the nation of Pakolistan goes under attack by the sorceress Circe and her army, the Sons of Themyscira, Amanda Waller assembles a team of non-human prison inmates known as Task Force M, or the Creature Commandos, to protect the nation's Princess Ilana Rostovic, who has promised petroleum deposits in her country to the US. Led by Rick Flag, the team arrives in Pakolistan and meets with Princess Ilana Rostovic, who manages to charm Rick Flag into a sexual relationship. While Dr. Phosphorus attempts to steal Flag's remote that triggers a painful shock in the team in order to keep them in line, resulting in a skirmish between the two, the bride and Nina sneak off to Frankenstein's castle, where the bride was created. Meanwhile, Eric Frankenstein is notified by a Pakolistani widow watching the castle that the bride has returned. I actually like how this series follows Peacemaker Season 1, at the end of which Amanda Waller's Task Force X is outed to the public and to the government, and so they strip her of her ability to form government teams using human inmates. So then she resorts to using non-human inmates or monsters for her missions.
Yeah, it's a pretty good loophole and very in keeping with the character of Amanda Waller.
Episode 2 was titled The Tourmaline Necklace. In flashbacks, we learn about the tragic origins of the bride, reluctantly created by Dr. Victor Frankenstein from the bodies of cadavers as a mate for Eric. Her education from Victor leads to a romantic attraction, culminating in Victor's death at the hands of the jealous Eric Frankenstein, who continues to pursue the bride across time and the planet. In the present, the bride and Nina locate a necklace that Victor once gave to the bride before the two are ambushed by Circe, whose Sons of Themyscira noticed the bride and Nina entering the castle, resulting in a brutal fight that leaves the bride and Nina defeated. This episode really makes you feel for the bride, who again came off as pretty standoffish in the first episode, but here you learn why that's the case, and it's a really interesting backstory.
Yeah, it was hard to know where the story was going. The fact that she went after a necklace really served to speak to her sentimental nature, I think, and that she truly loved Dr. Victor Frankenstein. And I'm wondering if she'll love anybody else the way she loved him. And it was almost like she lost the love of her life. Gotta say, though, it's pretty gross for Victor Frankenstein to bone this reanimated cadaver chick.
Necrophilia? Yeah. Very gross.
It's a little weird, yeah.
Episode 3 was titled Cheers to the Tin Man. In flashbacks, G.I. Robot's history is explored from his time as an effective soldier for the U.S. military during World War II to when he was reawakened by a military arms collector after decades of being decommissioned. After killing a group of neo-Nazis, G.I. Robot was imprisoned and later drafted into Task Force M. When the team arrives at Victor's castle to rescue Nina and the bride, they realize the two were kept alive to distract them from Circe's forces attacking Castle Rostovic and the princess. Flag and the team return to Rostovic's castle, now under siege, and during a chaotic battle, G.I. Robot is destroyed after saving the team. Circe is eventually defeated, but not before she exclaims that Task Force M has doomed the world. I really liked G.I. Robot's backstory, everything from World War II to seeing Dr. William Magnus converse with the character and give him upgrades and stuff like that. The upgrade of him like being able to detach his torso from his legs and just like levitate so he could spin around that way was pretty cool, even though it didn't really last very long.
What did you think of the characterization of Dr. William Magnus? because at some points it seemed a little bit sinister. I wasn't sure how I felt about that.
I didn't mind that. I know there's been some flirtation with Dr. William Magnus being a villain in the comics, so I think it was in keeping with that. I'm sure they'll do further exploration with the character, because I think he was planted in here to establish further DC Studio projects, like the Metal Men eventually at some point, because I don't really see any other reason why he was included here. He, of course, was voiced by Alan Tudyk, so maybe we'll actually get to see Alan Tudyk play that role in live action.
I was actually shocked when G.I. Robot died because he was so endearing as a character that you expected him to last throughout the entire series. I'm really glad that they brought him back, but I do have to commend the show for delivering on the stakes that they set up.
Yeah, I didn't think he was going to die either. It was when he did that I realized, oh shit, like, is no one safe? Is this like the Suicide Squad? I hadn't really made that connection earlier for some reason, that, hey, these characters can actually die in this adventure. Episode 4 was titled Chasing Squirrels. In flashbacks, Weasel befriends a group of school children only to be confused for their attacker. When a fire breaks out, authorities prioritize apprehending Weasel over rescuing the children. In the present, the team returns to Belle Reve, where Circe is interrogated and shows Waller a vision of an apocalyptic future caused by Princess Rostikov's rise to power. Though Flag insists on the princess's innocence after the assurance from leading Amazonian researcher Dr. Isla McPherson on Circe's credibility, Waller assigns the bride to lead the team in Flag's place on a mission to assassinate the princess. While the team heads back to Pokolistan, Eric Frankenstein ambushes Flag at his home with the assumption that he and the bride were in a relationship. Clearing up the misunderstanding, Eric and Flag agree to join forces to stop the princess's assassination. It was at this point in the series when you really begin to understand the deranged nature of Eric's obsession with the bride.
Yeah, and it was really unsettling, especially in the next episode when you get into his backstory. But yeah, I didn't like the character of Frankenstein at all here. This was one of the better episodes for me, in just that the story was probably the most tragic with Weasel and the group of children. I just want to know where those kids' parents were and why the school building was left unlocked.
Yeah, where was like the teacher supervisor?
I assumed that the kids were playing at their school's playground after hours or like on a weekend or something like that, which is why the school was empty during the time that the explosion occurred.
That makes sense. Yeah.
But I wanted to be like, don't play with fire, kids. Like, what are you doing? Don't do that.
That's like lesson number 1 that like a parent teaches their kids. Don't play with fire. Don't play with dangerous things.
But I really got pissed at the police officers when Weasel was trying to rescue the little girl and they prioritized shooting him over rescuing the little girl, you know?
Dude, how did one of those bullets not hit the little girl? That's all I was thinking about as that scene was happening.
Yeah. In the end, though, it didn't matter, which was truly sad.
Heartbreaking. Moving on to episode 5, titled The Iron Pot. In flashbacks, Eric Frankenstein is found by a blind medicine woman named Bogdana after the bride's initial attack and rejection. After being nursed back to health, rather than leave Bogdana alone, Eric kills her. In the present, Flag and Eric spy on Dr. McPherson, learning that she has been killed and replaced by Clayface. Flag manages to warn the princess over the phone that Task Force M is coming to kill her before he and Eric are attacked by Clayface. Clayface critically injures Flag before Eric manages to electrocute him. Meanwhile, Task Force M is ambushed and separated by the Pokolistani army shortly after they arrive in the country.
Now, if you were to rank all of the animated depictions of Clayface that we've gotten over the past year, including Creature Commandos, Harley Quinn, Suicide Squad Isekai, and Batman Caped Crusader, how would you rank those 4?
Well, I think the Caped Crusader version was the most interesting, but in terms of just faithfulness to the comics, I would actually say it's this Creature Commandos version.
Yeah, not that the other 2 aren't without their merit, but they were definitely looser adaptations of the character of Clayface. I also really liked this Creature Commandos version because he seemed more dangerous than the others.
Absolutely. Honestly, I'm kind of hoping that he appears in season 2 as a member of the team. I thought he worked really well in Suicide Squad Isekai as a part of the Suicide Squad.
Except he can't really put a bomb in his neck or like a taser, you know, as that show proved.
Magic. Just use magic.
I still can't get around why Frankenstein killed the old woman healer. I guess I don't quite get what happened there.
I guess in some sick, twisted rationale, he figured he was doing her a favor by having her not feel loneliness and rejection. but I thought it was unbelievably cruel.
Yeah, at that point, there was no real redeeming the character of Frankenstein, because before that, you knew that he was an asshole.
Right, but it wasn't until that moment that you saw he truly was a monster.
Right.
Moving on to episode 6, which was titled Prietel Skelett. In flashbacks, we learned that Dr. Phosphorus was a mad scientist named Alex Sartorius, who borrowed money from the mob to fund experiments on a machine that could cure cancer. When the mob kills his family and attempts to kill him in the machine, Alex is reborn as the radioactive Dr. Phosphorus, who kills the mobsters and fills the vacuum as a mob leader in the Gotham City underworld before being imprisoned by Batman. In the present, while on the run from the Pokolistani army, Phosphorus encounters a child who reminds him of his lost son, while the bride and Nina protect a local brothel, and Weasel bonds with a wolf pack. Each of the team members reunite on their way to Castle Rostovic to assassinate the princess.
This was a fantastic episode. Really tragic opening, but I like the way it set up the climax of the show toward the end. The dance number with Dr. Phosphorus was a little bit weird. Actually, there were quite a few musical numbers throughout the course of this series that kind of stood out to me in a distracting way, in a way that I don't think was entirely necessary. Like, James Gunn likes to use a lot of pop music in his projects, but in this show, some of them almost seem to just pad the runtime. Watching Dr. Phosphorus dance in his pimp outfit is one of those cases. There was also another instance, I think in episode 2, where we actually saw the band Gogo Bordello perform their song Start Wearing Purple. It was just weird. It was weird, like a music video.
I actually loved that. I loved all of the musical choices and numbers in this series, from Start Wearing Purple to seeing Dr. Phosphorus dancing. He was just so drunk on power that he could get away with stuff like that. Like I mentioned, I think the soundtrack for this series would make Quentin Tarantino proud.
For sure. But Dr. Phosphorus had a whole choreographed number with backup dancers and everything like that. You didn't find that distracting?
No, I was laughing.
Okay. All right. It was funny that it got interrupted by Batman.
Yeah, Batman wasn't having any of it. He was like, really, a dance number? Not having any of this shit. The final episode of the series, episode 7, was titled A Very Funny Monster. In flashbacks, we learned that Nina was born with deformed lungs, resulting in her father, the renowned geneticist and engineer Edward Mazursky, to create a mobile iron lung for his daughter. When Nina's mother leaves her family, Edward experiments on his daughter, turning her into an aquatic hybrid capable of breathing water. After being teased in school, Nina ran away from home, living in sewers as an urban legend, until she was caught by authorities, resulting in her father being shot while trying to rescue her. In the present, Task Force M makes their way into the castle security tower, where they find footage of Clayface with the princess, and where Eric finally catches up with them. Unwilling to hear anything from Eric, the bride dispatches him quickly before the team makes their way to a lake where the princess is swimming. Nina is tasked with executing the assassination, but fails and is killed by the princess when Weasel, who is fond of the princess, alerts her to the danger. After receiving a call from Amanda Waller calling off the assassination, the bride kills the princess nonetheless for killing Nina, and after piecing together that Cersei was right after all. A new Task Force M is formed in the aftermath, featuring a mix of survivors and new recruits, with the bride placed in charge once again. And that's the series. I really liked this episode. Nina Mazursky's backstory was just as tragic as the rest of them, but I think I felt a stronger connection to this one because, as a father, I have a daughter. I have 2 daughters, and there's nothing I wouldn't do for them.
Yeah, seeing Professor Mazursky's love for his daughter really made you have disdain for the mother and how she just didn't love the child. It was really heartbreaking when the father died in front of Nina as she was being arrested.
Oh yeah, totally. Ooh, right in the feels.
I do wonder about the practicality of genetically transforming your daughter into a gill creature, though, especially when she's having a hard enough time breathing anyway. To confine her to only breathing underwater was a little bit of a strange solution. I think he should have kept working on it.
Well, I got the impression that the experiment went somewhat wrong, or that he wasn't fully aware of what it would do. He was only trying to find a way for her to breathe with the liquid that was constantly in her lungs. And I'm not sure the result was what he intended. Because if you think about it, it wasn't that much better wearing a fishbowl on your head than it was walking around with an iron lung.
Right, exactly.
Again, the final moments of the series were among my favorites when the bride just straight up kills the princess for no other reason than killing her friend Nina. I'm really glad that they've announced a season 2 for the series, because whether we see them in live action or not, I can't wait to see more from these characters, particularly the bride. I think you could do a lot with this series and with a lot of DC's characters, like Clayface, like a number of villains within DC.
For sure. Yeah, the dialogue was well written. I think when you look at the quality of shows like Creature Commandos Season 1, like Peacemaker Season 1, and like the Suicide Squad, you can't help but be excited for the future of the DCU in James Gunn's hands as a DC fan.
Particularly as you described it, this quadrant. I'm really hoping this isn't the same tone that we'll see in a project like Superman or other DC fare, Supergirl, even the Lantern series. But for this, James Gunn's style and tone is absolutely perfect. Now, it's not a perfect show. As we mentioned, there are problems with the villain, but for the most part, despite its mature and violent nature, DC Studios' initial foray packs fun action spectacle and dire stakes while conveying that behind every monster, as I mentioned earlier, is a tragedy. I'm giving this show 4 out of 5 stars, a fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, I would agree with 4 out of 5 stars. That was the rating that I gave the first season of Hitmonkey, which I really enjoyed. I think there's a lot of commonalities between Hitmonkey and Creature Commandos.
Yeah, I love Hitmonkey for Marvel, and I'm really glad that DC has basically an equivalent to that in our universe. I liked season 2 of Hitmonkey a little bit more than season 1, which I think had probably too many episodes. But for Creature Commandos, they had just the right amount of episodes to tell the story they wanted to tell, which again was pretty simple. Maybe too simple, but I still really liked it.
For sure. Hopefully we hear word soon as to when season 2 begins production so we can know around the time that it's going to come out.
But that does it for this review. AJ9K helped close us out.
Thanks for listening to Dynamic Duel. Visit the show's website at dynamicduel.com and follow us on Instagram at Dynamic Duel Podcast. You can support the show on Patreon at patreon.com/dynamicduel and joining a tier that works for you, or by rating and reviewing Dynamic Duel on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podchaser, or on our website. Don't forget to listen to the other shows in the Dynamite Podcast Network, including Max Destruction, Senjo World, and Console Combat.
Our next episode is going to be a tie-in to Creature Commando Season 1, as we find out who would win in a fight between Circe, the Wonder Woman sorceress villain, versus Morgan Le Fay, the Avengers villain. Actually, she started out as a Black Knight villain, since his lore is steeped in Arthurian legend. But it's going to be a good episode.
Yeah, not only are these comic book characters, but they're also characters from myth. It's going to be awesome.
But that does it for this episode. We want to give a big thanks to our executive producers, Ken Johnson,
John Starosky,
Zachary Hepburn,
Dustyn Balcom,
Miggy Matanguihan,
Brandon Estergard,
Nathaniel Wagner,
Levi Yeaton,
Austin Wesolowski,
AJ Dunkerley,
Scott Camacho,
Gil Camacho,
Adam Speas, Dean Maleski,
Devin Davis,
Joseph Kersting,
Josh Leiner,
Mike Williams,
and Oscar Galvez for helping make this podcast possible. We'll talk to you guys next week. Up, up, and away.
True believers.
I wish I loved anything as much as G.I. Robot loves killing Nazis.